as this is a special session in this regard, and you see already some new people joining from a different conference. ISPIM is another big European innovation conference, and because of all this COVID shifting, we ended up doing it at exactly the same times. They are in Berlin virtually, we are in Aachen virtually. However, then we said, well, perhaps we have one joint 30 minutes, and this starts now. And they asked me to get a great person from our OUI community that is perhaps not so well known to everyone yet as Eric. Everyone knows Eric. Oh, I see Marcel. Everyone knows Marcel. But perhaps to go into, but also is doing really great research. And then Eric said, you have to ask Jana. And I said, yeah, Jana is a great idea. So Jana Gallus, welcome to have you. It's my pleasure. And we do this a little bit different. As ISPIM, they really think a lot about their conferences. And they asked me, do a fireside chat. And I said, well, fireside chat, this really sounds like Christmas. So I decided to have a campfire chat. So let's think we are now at a picnic outside, you know, and I would say, okay, Jana, let's talk about incentives, motives in open community. But perhaps to start with a short introduction. You are an economist, did your PhD in Zurich with a very famous scholar, Bruno Frey. And so now you're, you know, teach at UCLA, a management school, and teach executives how to behave and use incentives. So what is your journey, perhaps, very briefly?
Yeah, thank you very much, Frank and Eric and everybody for having me. By the way, I brought, as if I had known at the campsite, I brought a mug that's just perfect for campsite fire chats. Yes, so I did my PhD in Zurich, and then afterwards I did a postdoc at Harvard, and then moved on. I was lucky, to land at UCLA in the strategy as well as the behavioral decision-making groups. So I'm in two groups, and that kind of also reflects my research. Writ large, I am fascinated by what motivates people, and in particular, what motivates fruitful human coordination. So not just the lone gardener or the lone tinkerer, but actually, looking at the intersection of people, and what makes that meaningful, what makes that work meaningful. And I have a specific interest in two fields. The first one is knowledge creation and innovation. And the second one is public goods provision, which of course, open and free, democratizing innovation, it falls right in there oftentimes. And so that explains also why I like to consider myself as belonging to this community. And then my background, as you said, is in economics. So I usually use, the economic toolkit to analyze the questions that I research. And mostly I use field experiments. And I'll give you an example about that in a moment. So meaning, yeah, Frank, I see you want to say something. Oh, you're still muted.
Thank you.
Frank, you're...
yeah, I'm now hopefully demuted. And well, yeah, you already explained my next question, why you are part of this open and user innovation community. Makes a lot of sense. And I have to say, well, and this is how I got to know you for since a couple of years. But then actually, a couple of months ago, my mother living here in Aachen came to me with our local German newspaper. And she said, oh, Frank, there's an article I think that's interesting for you, as there's someone who's doing open communities and running, and I just cut it for you. And I looked at it, and there was such a big picture of Jana in our Aachen local paper. And this was not about your economics research, but about something very different. You did virtual marathon, run the world. And actually, if it would have been a virtual marathon, I could have participated, but it's a real marathon where people run virtually. So I have to say, with marathon and sports in general, it's a pure theory to me, but perhaps can you explain a little bit to us? So what is it? And I know it even connects to your work. So what is Run the
Indeed,
World?
it does, yes. So I kind of stumbled into creating Run the World, which is a global virtual marathon. But I will say, Frank and everybody, you don't have to run the full marathon. You can also collaborate in teams, participate in teams and run or walk.
Okay, with
not
a
just
team
the full
of,
distance.
what is it, 42 kilometers? I think with a team of 84 people, I will survive.
You might. Okay. So for you, it's the armchair marathon then more. So yes, so what brought about that project is this. Well, on the one hand, COVID happened, of course, and I am a runner. And here you see, by the way, the interesting, what we just talked about, identities. Mila mentioned it, and me saying I am a runner as opposed to I run tells you something, which is also that there's potential in creating a community, right, of people who consider themselves to be runners. Now, I was running, I was teaching like all our first year MBAs and trying to clear my thoughts while running and think about the research. And then I realized that normally the LA Marathon would be coming up, and was kind of sad that this wouldn't happen because of COVID. We have to strictly isolate because I have 3 kids and they are at high risk. And so then I realized that actually there's nothing holding me back from running a marathon in March. And I'll make it very short, but on that one run, which was not a lot of time, I thought I might as well reach out to some friends and colleagues who I know are runners and see whether we would want to coordinate and run a marathon, together in spirit on the same day. And that seemed to have struck a nerve, which I believe is also partly, this goes already to the question about motivations and what makes work and life and activities meaningful. I think COVID took us, 2 important parts, which is on the one hand, the sense of agency. We can have influence over what we do. We can tinker and create something, right? We can control our environment, which is an important motivation for human beings, as we all know. And on the other hand, social connectedness. And then I realized that actually this run kind of falls into both of those categories, because it's about, I get out there, I put on my shoes no matter what, and COVID can't stop me. Well, mostly, unfortunately, not always, but we can take control over our lives, and at the same time we can actually be connected, and then try to use that not just to develop a second best to the normal LA Marathon, but actually really try to think about how can we make such virtual communities fun and perhaps even in some regards better than the non-virtual co-located alternatives. Well, and while
now you already explained your connections, I think, of Run the World. It's a user innovation, isn't it? You as a user were in desperate somehow need of doing your hobby and part as a competition. And so was there an award for winning this? Could you win this, or was it about this feeling?
So this is actually something where also my research and interest in motivations come in. And in incentives. So we did, you said like it's almost a no-brainer that there would be awards and that it's a competition, but in fact it's not. Because all the commercial players also, by the way, now I realize there are some other commercial alternatives who allow you to pay some money in order to run in front of your own house, but you get an award or something in return, or you're a part of this exclusive club, and that justifies the fee, which makes sense for. And then often actually all of the others I've seen really continue to emphasize the race component, the competition. We want to compete against others. But I actually thought, I have some research also with a colleague who's an anthropologist, and we research how different types of human relationships interact with incentives. And there is one important form of relational models, which is communal sharing, where we want to consider ourselves as part of something bigger, as part of a group, unity motives. And this, I think, in particular during this time with the pandemic, that we want to consider ourselves as part of the society or of a group rather than, competing in a hierarchy, competing against the others, made me think very carefully about incentives, but even also just the provision of information on the platform. So we do not deliberately not publicize individual run times, individual distances, and instead everything feeds into the common tracker, so to speak. And so that is one, it's like a participation incentive as opposed to tournament incentives. And I haven't yet seen that in other communities, but just anecdotally speaking, by the way, the research is coming now, but anecdotally speaking, so far, it has actually led to several people joining this community, because otherwise, so for example, somebody who had physical, like heart problems, told me that the person would be very interested in joining, but then with everything being made public, that wouldn't be so nice, because the person would be coming in last. And then once I said that actually there won't be any information disclosed about individuals' times, which is very common for marathons, that they would display this, led them to actually participate. So I think they're just rethinking these incentives and not going with the standard race tournament, everything is zero sum, but instead saying, how can we foster communities in the sense of not tracking individual inputs, right? That's where it starts. And I think that's also something where open innovation platforms where we can think a lot more about how to facilitate that, how to prevent the challenge mindset and go, which, by the way, even those collaboration centered platforms still have just the labels of challenge and prizes and one winner, but there is something to be said about the community angle and about how to structure the platform so that we can actually feel like this is a joint effort and not so much of a competition.
Oh, so there was lots of information. I think we'll come back to a couple of really interesting topics, but I just want to connect to Tobias Augsburger for the ISPIM people. We had earlier in the same OUI conference that Tobias Augsburger, you see him here out of Aachen, and he runs a site called Open Sustain Tech. So open hardware and open source on sustainability. And he shared his difficulties to get people into this. So Jana, I would say this is also about participation, it's about saving the world. What's your take and perhaps recommendation if now you don't do marathon side, which is your hobby, and you said you get so much out of this, so you really have a big personal motivation. But if you do something for our children, our children's children, for really a much larger crowd, where it's much more difficult to allocate, to your individual participation to. So does this also work in this very probably most large-scale setting we have?
Yeah, it won't come as a surprise if I reiterate the point that this is very challenging. And I think if we think about also what Eric and others have researched about self-rewards and what motivates people, there are a few things that I think in terms of ESG and also, climate change that we can take into account. Now, specifically, Tobias, to your platform, which is very interesting, and trying to see the connections here. One important the participation, getting the platform started, right? This chicken and egg problem that we usually have. I think one powerful tool that we have is to tap in, or method is to tap into people's communities and try to have them on board their own communities, so that already they bring with them their peers and their peer group. That's what happened for Run the World too, where somebody heard about it, and then actually it was them who spread the word and who onboarded other team members. And that just made it, on the one hand, that totally, I didn't have any work with this. This was something I should actually emphasize, super low cost, basically zero cost, just a few hours on my part. But then also for them, it actually makes the participation even more fun. And I think fun is such an important part. Fun can come from learning or just enjoying this problem solving, but also from the social interactions, right? Having this community, this peer group. And that's something with climate change that unfortunately the focus is oftentimes, as we know, right, there's this research also, should you shock people so to motivate them to do something, or should you try to have like incremental steps? And I think with climate change, it's all, of course, there's nothing really that we see to be gained. It's more like prevent the catastrophe. And so to the extent that we can make it fun by, for example, encouraging people to bring their own peers whom they care about, whom they like to hang out with each other. So I researched Wikipedia and have a paper there, and what precedes and also goes along with that research is lengthy meetings and roundtable meetups and conferences. So I spoke to hundreds of Wikipedians, and there too, it's a very interesting question in this community too, where you have a product, so there's production, and it's a strong production orientation. And at the same time, there's always this tension to how much socialization should there be? How much social interactions and fun should there be on the platform, where even the longtime members recognize that this can be a source of motivation. But then at the same time, you still want people.
So you're saying really, it's really fun that drives people to Wikipedia?
Fun?
There's Veronica, I think you're unmuted.
No.
But you might want to say something.
No. So is it really fun? Is this really a fun aspect in Wikipedia?
I think there are different reasons, and Eric and I we actually researched that at length and in different communities, and it's exceedingly difficult to describe the pool, also the richness of motivations that guide this behavior or that underlie this behavior. Plus, not just does it differ from one individual to the others, but it also evolves over time. So those motivations change. You might just start, and I believe that is quite right, that many people just start because they recognize nowadays. That also, by the way, changed from the early days. But nowadays, usually you see a mistake or you see something doesn't yet have an entry, and then you try to provide that entry. You make a few small edits, and then don't necessarily plan on staying around or doing much. But then there might be others who reach out to you, or you might recognize other aspects of this that then make you stay around for longer. So the reasons, the bigger point here is that the reasons for joining are not necessarily the reasons for staying. And that goes into a whole host of other, some systematic changes.
And when I think about this is very interesting. In the traditional technology diffusion literature, there is this valley of death, that these people that first adopt a new product have very different motives and incentives than those that are, the late adopters and so on. And that the mistake of companies often is to pitch, and announce a product in the same way to these early adopters. So would we see the same in community, if you say, have you seen this as people really being new to a community? Perhaps now at the beginning, if we go back to Run the World, that those that were the first cohort, the pioneers because of COVID, that they are motivated and also, loyal to your community out of different reasons than those that would be latecomers, or perhaps just like people like me who would like to have, can I print a participation?
Yes.
Oh, cool. I would put this on my, and say, oh, I survived the Run the World Marathon. So perhaps it's a very different motive. So do you see this kind of, like a timeline or of participation?
So for Run the World, we are going to have the second the second event on September 18th. By the way, everybody join, please. You can also
I think
walk.
Marcel, you were part of it, or
yes,
saw it on Twitter. Yeah.
Indeed. So you can still join, please do join. But I think that is right. So because there's also some, several things about the first cohort. On the one hand, there's a selection effect, right? Those who are staunch runners will join early. Those are your early adopters oftentimes. Then there's going to be bragging rights as well with other communities, right? It's being the first cohort as opposed to somebody who joined later. So I do think there are fundamental differences across platforms between those who just joined early. Also in my conversations and interviews, excuse me, with Wikipedians, the first cohort, they were around from the very beginning, right? And were explaining me how things were still different. And you could tell that their motivations were very different from those of people who joined later on for other reasons, right? Once the project is already successful and you join, that's something different from joining when it's not yet successful. I see Eric has raised.
Exactly. I just wanted to, Eric.
Oh, so I think a really interesting thing that Jana triggered here, because we've been talking a lot about motivations, and one of this thing about self-reward is that you can trigger something with very little effort, because what you're doing is providing an organizational seed around things where people bring their own motivations. So Jana, with absolutely no effort at all, just said, hey, you want to do this? And everybody said, oh yeah, I want to do this. And they were bringing, you know, as Frank says, the reward changes over time, and as Jana said as well. But the thing is, if you've got your own reward, the organizer has to invest much less. I don't know, Jana, whether you can comment about that.
Yes, that's so well said, because I actually didn't have to invest anything. It's almost, so I will say though that that there are a few choices, right? So depending on how you set it up, I could have also gotten myself into a huge problem by saying, by increasing the variable cost. So what I mean is, for example, I basically just said, here's a platform, join if you want, you know, spread the word, or people actually spread the word themselves and onboarded others. And they were just motivated to get, you know, also some were motivated by, you know, having a self-commitment to get out and run there, right? That's the very own use value. Others were motivated by getting this as an opportunity to connect with others whom they hadn't connected with for a long time. And so there were various reasons why they joined. My job then was, let me not mess up with their original motivations. And that's actually easier said than done, because oftentimes what happens when platforms, then when you think about platform designs, you come up with small tweaks that then distort people's motivations. Just to give you one example, Tobias, you mentioned GitLab earlier. GitHub, of course, also they are now thinking about incentives. GitHub at some point, you might have seen that they used to have this streak, which is benign, right? It just visualizes the day when somebody was contributing to open source. You wouldn't think that this could cause any harm, but in fact, it turns out it did, because it gets people hooked on the streak. So even with such a benign incentive as visualizing the days that you were active, you can actually distort people's motivation. So it's really, and knowing that, I thought very carefully about how can I preserve their motivations. And with whatever I do to add, I just, you know, enhance them, but I don't destroy them, right? So and I think that's an important challenge that we face when we talk about newcomer retention. And the other one about variable costs is I also decided to keep it super low tech and, for example, not produce medals to ship out to people, because that would have been a variable cost. I would have had to do that for every runner. What I had to do is design one certificate that would be automatically distributed via an email to everybody who joins, automatically with their name. So that was one fixed cost, very low. And then it was in German, we have this Selbstrenner. It ran for it, you know, it developed its own legs.
Yeah, and I think this is really interesting, because what we now have is the opportunity, in a sense, to throw in a seed or crystallization, and then the system crystallizes itself. It's not like open source or like a formal marathon where you have to invest a ton and then you have to have other people pay to have you invest that ton. It's fascinating.
But Eric, so I know you are not interested in this, but with the ISPIM community, you are very much interested in traditional companies, and you work for traditional companies, established companies, and innovate in those. So what can these traditional companies do? Does this only work, you know, in open source communities, in user-driven communities where you don't have this? Or can we also transfer this, you know, and Jana and also Hila earlier mentioned this, we have all these crowdsourcing contests and challenge and company, you know, set up communities. So are these mechanisms also work there? Or is this the very traditional?
So I think the thing is that anybody can throw in a seed and trigger activity. The problem that a company then has is they want to drag profit out. And then this makes them sort of put parameters and investments and constraints around it. But both have the access to this idea of crystallizing a movement by throwing in a seed.
Yeah, so Jana, you agree?
Yes, and I would add, so for companies, there's an additional challenge too, which is you are already stuck with the employees that you have. If we think about, there are of course different types of open innovation that they use, but if you use an intra-organizational, innovation platform, you have a given employee set, and then you have to see who is motivated to join. So the reason why I'm talking about this is because of a project with NASA where we ran a field experiment around motivating employees to engage with an internal innovation platform where everybody could throw in a seed and or could put out an idea or actually a problem that they were facing that they didn't know an answer for. And that is very difficult to get these platforms to be adopted and also used by employees, where it's this set universe or population, whereas with these open innovation communities such as Wikipedia or Run the World, this is open, anybody can join, and there are these sparks, and for some people they catch fire, and because that really motivates them for one reason or another, and for others it doesn't, and it doesn't matter for the platform, right? So how many people join, who joins, that's not so important for this open platform.
Yeah, very interesting, very interesting. So time is running up already, but I have one question I really wanted to ask you as an expert in awards and incentives. So can I bring this to my traditional organization, which is a traditional university? So what are the tricks you use to incentivize your students at UCLA? So you also, as what we have is grading and feedback, like this. Any more innovative you could recommend to us professors?
I bet you have already introduced these, but I should say though that I'm very careful. So much of my research is focused on social recognition, so incentives that are built on the social networks. Mm-hmm. And I did a large-scale field experiment with Wikipedia that showed that even purely symbolic recognition has long-lasting and powerful effects. For over a year, it kept motivating those who got such a recognition, such a symbolic digital token. But I've also found in other contexts that this can backfire. If not, for example, if you give it for the wrong type of behavior. Many organizations, including schools, like to motivate and award attendance, which is something that should be expected. So definitely praise. And by the way, it doesn't have to be a formal award. I think now also tying this back to your earlier question, Frank, about what commercial organizations can do or public universities. I think thinking much more about discretionary awards. That means not this employee of the month thing that you set up and then you're tied against, because every month you have to find somebody. And in fact, with many organizations that I've worked with, they run out of candidates, which is which is hilarious. So thinking about discretionary awards and even informal awards, that's something that I do. To your now recent question, I highlight and spotlight individual students who have just done something phenomenal without this being a formal award, right? And highlight that in front of others, which makes the signal even stronger. I think that's a powerful tool that in fact oftentimes I think from the manager's perspective gets crowded out. For the managers, oftentimes, oh, we give money and that's it, I can stop thinking. But that's not it. That's not why your employees even are there, right? There's something about social signaling and self-signaling, and if you get such a recognition from somebody who's important, then that can have long-lasting effects.
Yeah, and I think this is actually, when I listen to you and think about it, a practice 3M, a company normally considered as a very innovative company, often does, as they say, for innovation, they don't have any monetary awards. They first of all only have team awards. So you don't get it, as they say, innovation is with team sport. And then in the end, it's a picture, in the company's magazine and a nice text about it. And then you get still something to put on your desk, which is very ugly, but people are still proud of having this tangible thing. So I think that was perhaps one thing they also got right. Okay, we are at the end of the session. Again, a session where we're really now just starting to come into the topic where we have to stop. As I think both in the ISPIM communities and in the OUI community, we now immediately start with the next round of sessions. So all who contributed here, Tobias, Mila, Jana, thank you so much for being here, sharing your thoughts. And well, I know we all stay in touch. And also thank you to the ISPIM people for stopping by at OUI for at least some time. Okay, with this, I close the session, okay? And OUI people, go to the next session. They immediately start now. Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Christoph,
Thank you.
I'm still here now. He went out. there were really some nice people, some nice friends also from the ISPIM community coming. It's a good idea. Yeah. So, Jana, vielen Dank. Super.
Dankeschön, Frank. Das war toll.
Well, we should speak English. That I did.
Yes.
Somehow we met, and I never knew that you have German origins. Somehow, as I only met you when you were already in the US. So.
Surprise! Yes, I know. Yes.
Yeah. But then, actually, preparing this very late, I realized, no, you're even famous in Germany, at least in Hessen. No, perfect. Okay. Thanks a lot.
See you.
Okay.
Thank you.
See you all. Bye bye.